Our next guest was born the year her parents lost everything and filed for bankruptcy. It was through those years of sacrifice that Rachel Cruze developed an appreciation for money management and a desire to educate people about wise financial choices. It also doesn't hurt that her father is the well-known New York Times bestselling author and money expert, Dave Ramsey. In Dave and Rachel's new book, Smart Money, Smart Kids, Raising the Next Generation to Win with Money, the father and daughter team address some of the ways parents can help their children learn how to save, avoid debt for life, and create a spirit of giving. Welcome, Rachel.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us. Well, I want to know, what was it like growing up in the Ramsey household, especially right after your parents had lost everything? I know that you were quite young.
That's right. I was actually born the year my parents filed for bankruptcy. So I was born in April and they filed in September. So my entire life, I watched Dave and Sharon Ramsey figure out how money works and kind of had a front row seat in that sense, which was wonderful. And mom and dad, they were obviously very intentional with teaching us how money works. But I think people assume that growing up as Dave Ramsey's kid, that we had mutual fund parties and like budget meetings all the time. And thankfully that wasn't the case. They were very normal with their approach, but we did learn lessons about money growing up.
Talking about lessons, what would you say was the most valuable lesson that you learned as, you saw your parents kind of patch their lives back together and as you grew up?
I would say probably staying away from debt was one of the most valuable lessons. And obviously debt was a huge part of my parents' story because they went into so much debt that they had to file for bankruptcy because of it. And so debt was a four-letter word in our house growing up that it was really this idea that you will never borrow money. And that was been ingrained in me. And so as an adult, it's the same. I've never had a credit card or a car loan. My husband and I now, if we don't have the money, we don't buy it. And so staying out of debt for me has been huge. And one of my reasons that I'm so passionate about this next generation, because this next generation is the most indebted generation in history. And I want to be able to get them free from that to be able to win financially.
You talk about debt, and I think you do mention this in the book, that there is kind of this preconceived notion that you have to be in debt or you have to have credit in order to have a good standing to buy a house and do all of these things. And I'm amazed at reading your book that you really don't. This is a preconceived notion that we've gone by for so many years that is false, essentially.
Absolutely. People assume you can't be a student without a student loan, and that you have to have a credit card to survive, and there's no way to drive a nice car without a car loan. All of these things, these lies really that we've believed as a culture, and what's happening is it's harming us because our paycheck comes in and our paycheck goes right back out. We're not able to take our money and give it and save it and spend it. We're not able to do these things because we owe other people money. And emotionally as well, debt is a very heavy topic. I mean, you lose sleep at night. Debt steals your peace of mind. Scripture says that the borrower is slave to the lender, and that's true. And so being able to find freedom from that and freedom from those payments, it's an amazing thing.
And so, what Dave Ramsey and your mom have done is they've passed this on to you and your brother and sister as well, to the next generation. And so you kind of talk about that. You and your dad kind of tag team throughout this book, which I love. And he's quite cheeky to you throughout the book, which I appreciate. And the first thing you guys address is the importance of work and creating work ethic in your household. And the word allowance was not used, but instead commission was used. Explain that.
That's right. Mom and dad hated the word allowance, so we were on commission, which means you work, you get paid. You don't work, you don't get paid. It's kind of like an adult, right? You and me, we have to come to work, and if we work, we get paid. If we don't work, we don't get paid. And so they really seeped that into our souls very, very early on. And so we had chores to do around the house, and if we did the chore, we got paid. And I love that because it made this work-money connection, that money comes from work. Money doesn't just come from mom and dad's back pockets. And so for me growing up, that was huge. And now as an adult, I'm not scared to work hard. I'm not scared of having a work ethic. And so that was really ingrained in me early on. So laying that foundation for your kids is huge. Again, parents, to teach your kids that money comes from work and giving them chores that you pay them on.
Okay, so Rachel, when I first read this, I was a little weary. As I said to you earlier before we started, I'm a mom of two. Many of our viewers know that. And so I grew up in a household probably much like the Ramseys. It was very it sounds like your dad was quite rigid. And my mom and my dad were very, very rigid as well. But I didn't get paid for doing things. And so I've always I would get a little bit of money on the side, but I've always had this idea that you don't pay children to do work around the house. It's their house. They're supposed to do the work.
Absolutely, and I say both. So there should be chores that you do because you're part of the family, just like what you're saying. So growing up for us, anything in the kitchen we didn't get paid on. We were expected to set the table. We were expected to take our dishes to the sink and clean the kitchen as we got older. Those things were just expected because exactly what you're talking about. And you're teaching your kids in that you don't get paid for every little thing. There should be things that you don't get paid for. But I do think you miss so many great teachable moments if you don't pay your kids on something. Because when they earn money from work they've done, they give it differently, they save it differently, and they spend it differently because they feel the emotion that's involved. And so I think that you do miss out on something. So find, a few chores that you pay them on, and then some chores, just like you're saying, you need to do because you're part of the family.
And you say start as young as 3 years old, Rachel. So there is a money exchange as early as 3 years old. I have a 2.5-year-old, and I'm thinking he can't handle money.
Absolutely. Well, you're not going to hand your 3-year-old, a debit card. It's very, very age appropriate. And so very little things, as the 3-year-old goes and helps pick up the toys, maybe that's something you pay him on. And you say, okay, if you pick up the toys, you get X amount. Maybe it's a quarter, maybe it's $1. I don't know. It's going to depend on each family. But to pay them and show them, hey, this is what happens. And then let them at 3, 4, 5 years old have a little plastic container on their dresser in their room, and let the money build up. And then after 2, 3 weeks, take that money down and let them buy a little toy with it. And it could be just a little car, it could be something very, very small. But you start this interaction slowly of showing them that money comes from work, and when you have money, you can give it, save it, and spend it. But at 3, 4, 5 years old, again, very age appropriate. You're not expecting them to go mow the lawn or something, right? It's very, very age appropriate.
And I love what your dad says. Be excited about it. If you in Canada we don't have dollar bills, but try to make the jar look bigger or fuller than it really is, so that they feel like there's $1 million in this jar. I know you talk about that as well.
That's exactly right. Making it visual for them and watching their money build up. I mean, it's huge. And yeah, like you said, there could be maybe $8 in there, but to them with everything in it, it's like, oh wow, it looks like $30,000, to a little kid. And so being able to show that visual is huge for them to watch their money grow.
You also talk later on about the envelope system, and I know, Dave Ramsey's been known for that for so many years, the envelope system, and really transferring that to children. So there are 3 different envelopes, and explain what they would be.
Well, once your kid turns around 6 years old, from 6 to 12, you can introduce this concept of, like what you're saying, the envelope system. So to have 3 envelopes: give, save, and spend. And when your child gets paid on the chores they do throughout the week, I say have one night a week that's kind of payday night, if you will. For us growing up, it was always Sunday night. And we sat down and we saw the chores that we had to do. And if we did the chore, we got paid. If we didn't do the chore, we didn't get paid. And the money we earned, we had to divide up into giving, saving, and spending. Because you want your kids to learn all 3 things. You want them to be givers and teaching them giving at a young age. You want to teach them to save money. So when they're adults, they save money and they don't move back home with you, right? That they know how to save. And then lastly, let them spend and enjoy their hard work. So dividing up in those 3 things, letting the cash go into the envelopes is great for them, because it really shows kind of this minor way of budgeting.
And you use a great example of, 6-year-old Rachel going to Opryland with your parents and your sister, I believe your brother as well, maybe, and your dad had given you your envelope that you could spend, and you spent everything right away and learned very quickly that there were repercussions to that.
That's exactly right. Yeah, we had to take our spend envelope, and we were going into that theme park, and I remember Mom and Dad saying, if you can spend your money, but when it's gone, it's gone. We're not giving you any money. And I was a natural spender. I still am. I love spending money. I'm better at that than saving sometimes, but I love spending money. And so as a 6-year-old, I walked in, saw the first little game they had, and spent all my money in probably about 3 minutes, and didn't win the stuffed animal. I lost it all. And I turned to Mom and Dad and I said, I need more money. I need more money. And I remember Dad saying, Rachel, when the money's gone, it's gone. And I realized in that moment that money has limits, money has boundaries, it's finite. When you spend it, it's gone. And so that was a huge lesson for me, and a lesson I've kind of had to learn over and over again, especially as a kid. But that was one memory I have with my money that I realized, oh, I felt the emotion of spending it and realizing that it's gone.
I think for me, that story was an aha moment for me, because many of us make those mistakes once we're adults and we don't have, our parents to cushion that and kind of teach us, and for us to learn from that as a young age. And so, that for me was proved the case of why we need to teach our children at a young age how to save, spend, and give.
Absolutely. Those lessons that you learn as a child or as you're teaching your kids, that they're going to remember that, and it's really shaping and molding who they're going to become with their money. And I think so many parents, they don't realize how intentional you have to be. It doesn't have to be, again, this money summit that you have with your kids, but find those everyday teachable moments that you just slip in and say, hey, here's how money works. And your kids are going to remember that, and it's going to shape them into becoming good with their money as they get older.
Yeah. And ultimately, I know, you stress this in your book, as well as your dad, that ultimately it's not our money, it's God's money. And when you have that kind of focus and that mindset, then you think about finances differently, and you pass that on to your children as well. I know that your dad and your mom made that very clear as well, and they're giving as well.
Yes, you have to live with an open hand, because it's not yours. It's not yours to begin with. You're managing this money for God. And as your kids become spiritually more aware of that, it's an amazing tool for them to have, because I think so many of us, we live our lives like this, and it's just so easy just to hold on. But when you live your life with that open hand, knowing that it's ultimately God's money, and being able to give and serve people well with it, it's an incredible, incredible thing. When you're giving, you're becoming less selfish. You're becoming selfless. And selfless people, I believe, have a more joyful life. And I believe you learn gratitude and contentment, all of these things through the lessons of giving, but understanding with the perspective that it's not yours, that you're managing it for God.
Well said. Well, thank you again, Rachel Cruze, the author of the book, Smart Money, Smart Kids, Raising the Next Generation to Win with Money. So well worth the read. I mean, we just touched the iceberg, Rachel, of all of the different topics that you and your dad address in this book, from budgeting to family to contentment, saving, all sorts of stuff. So thank you again for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on.